Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, April 25th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Virginia and the lieutenant governor's race that will coincide with this year's regularly scheduled November governor election in this state between Winsome Sears and Abigail Spanberger. The lesser-known lieutenant governor's race is one that has now come into the spotlight as the media reports that Governor Glenn Youngkin, a Republican, has called the presumptive Republican nominee for lieutenant governor inquiring about potentially some sexually explicit posts that allegedly that John Reed, the lieutenant governor presumptive nominee, had posted on Tumblr in years past, asking him about these allegations as well as asking him to step down from the race. Now, this comes at a time where there is ample opportunity for the lieutenant governor candidate, John Reed, to drop out and be replaced by the Virginia Republican Party. They have that ability until the around the middle of June when the official primary process goes underway, at which, so far, John Reed has announced that he will not be departing the race as lieutenant governor and vehemently denies these allegations that have been put forth against him. Now, this is something that I think matters beyond just simply petty partisan politics. I think that whenever you have an incumbent governor, much less a member of the incumbent party, that is trying to maintain control, asking a member of their own party to step down out of the race, it generally has good reason for that to happen. And what we've seen in the most recent election, I don't know how many of you guys remember that in all of this conversation around the 2024 presidential election, one thing that we covered quite heavily on here was the North Carolina gubernatorial race between Mark Robinson and Josh Stein. Mark Robinson, who at the time was the lieutenant governor of North Carolina, running against the attorney general, Josh Stein, in that battleground state. And if you remember anything about the 2024 presidential election, it's that North Carolina shifted all the way back to the right, voting for Donald Trump by a larger margin than they did in the 2020 election, as well as a similar margin as the 2016 election. But the North Carolina governor's race, however, went entirely different. And if you remember, it wasn't just that we covered the result of the North Carolina election. We also covered the fact that way back when this was happening in September of 2024, that Mark Robinson faced calls to drop out from members of his own party because of a looming bombshell that would eventually doom this governor campaign. What we saw on election night in North Carolina was the prime example of how scandal-plagued candidates can really do damage regardless of what was happening at the top of the ticket. Donald Trump won North Carolina, but there were plenty of voters out there that simply could not bring themselves to vote for Mark Robinson, enough so that he lost in this race by 15 percentage points to a Democrat in North Carolina. To put things into perspective, Governor Roy Cooper, who was the incumbent Democrat at the time, won re-election back in 2020 by just 4.5%. And I say just 4.5% because Roy Cooper was popular. He was a multi-time statewide elected official. The Republicans didn't even field a candidate against him in 2012 on the same ballot that Mitt Romney won on for a statewide race when Roy Cooper ran for attorney general. And yet, because Donald Trump was winning North Carolina by 2 points statewide, the bottom of that ballot, or I guess next race, the gubernatorial race, was held up for Democrats because the margin could only be as extreme as the polarized voters that voted in the presidential election would let it. The amount of crossover support there was less than 10%. In 2024, it was far more. And again, understanding why, it ultimately has to come down to the fact that Mark Robinson, in facing calls from his own party to drop out, they knew he was finished. They knew he was done. That's what's happening this time around with Glenn Youngkin, who arguably holds a lot of weight in the Virginia GOP, potentially even more than that of President Donald Trump, but that really doesn't matter. Youngkin has always been about winning. He led his party to victory in 2021. The polls said Youngkin would win by 1.7. He did better than that, won by 1.9. But you know who also won with him? It wasn't just him winning governor, but everything else went awry. The House of Delegates, you saw the Attorney General's race, you saw the Lieutenant Governor's race. Republicans won back control of the House of Delegates by flipping numerous seats that Democrats held. And they were also able to take down Mark Herring, who had been a two-time elected Attorney General, 2013, 2017, ran again in 2021, going for a third term. He narrowed up the race, but ultimately, it was Glenn Youngkin that led these Republicans to victory. And looking at the shift from 2020, it was red all over. Looking at the 2025 Virginia governor's race, the results look a lot better for Democrats this time around than they did in 2021. But Republicans are trying to avoid any type of fallout later down the ballot. Because what they know is that similar to the result in 2024, if Democrats continue to weaponize and utilize these scandals and these allegations that John Reed faces, enough so that his own party is saying you are no longer electorally viable, give somebody else the opportunity. And as he pushes back, as he says, I don't want to step down from the race, preventing a major change in the race, he only does damage to the GOP ticket. And looking at the Republican primary and how all of this happened, well, it actually wasn't John Reed who was meant to be the nominee. What we saw was that Fairfax supervisor, Fairfax being one of the bigger counties in the state of Virginia, Pat Harity, a Republican, decided to withdraw from the race for health concerns. You can see those who failed to qualify and those who have declined to run have decided to either do something in the Trump administration, or it's the incumbent lieutenant governor who's deciding to run for governor. The point being, with Pat Harity on the Republican side pulling out, it gave John Reed the opportunity as the only other Republican who qualified to now be that presumptive nominee. And with that, he does become, in theory, right, this Republican nominee. Should he pull back and give some time again for that June primary that's going to take place with the Democrats? But up between now and then, if he decides to stay in the race, the party can't force him out. They can try, but they can't force him out and say, we're not running you anymore. It's all on his own accord because rightfully so, seemingly, he won that primary. And so I think the GOP really thinks that this lieutenant governor's race, if it gets out of their hands, could drag down Winsome Sears as well. The difference between the North Carolina gubernatorial race and the presidential election is that they were fundamentally different races, right? North Carolina had an impact to make a difference on the national stage and vote for a candidate they believed should be in Washington, D.C., not in their state capital. But when it came down to the governor's race, they couldn't fathom the idea of Mark Robinson being governor, and so you see that so many Republicans dropped off. Josh Stein received 3 million votes. Donald Trump received just 2.89 million. Josh Stein is the most voted for candidate by raw vote number in North Carolina history and the best performing Democrat in this state in a very long time. Mark Robinson was damning to the party in North Carolina. And while I do think the presidential election was different, look no further than some of their other statewide positions. You can see here, if we can actually get past this point, if we go to the North Carolina state results, the governor's race went blue. And in terms of their competitive races here, what you found was that Republicans actually very much drew their map here. The lieutenant governor's race went to the Democrats. Unlike 2020, when Mark Robinson won that race, the attorney general's race went to the Democrats. Just a bit of an interesting fact here for North Carolina, if you're interested. Just as a side note, North Carolina has not had a Republican attorney general in a very long time. The last time they've had a Republican in the attorney general's office, I think might have been in the 1800s, right around the Civil War era, and maybe, right after or right before. All I know is that Jeff Jackson continues a long, long, long history of Democrats doing well in the attorney general's race. And a lot of you have to ask, was Mark Robinson doing damage? Dan Bishop was a member of Congress. He had been elected in North Carolina before. Should he have won this race? With Mark Robinson not dragging down the GOP 15 points at the top, very possibly that could be the case. And the thing about Virginia, too, is that you're not going to throw all of these other elections onto it like a presidential or a Senate race. This is an off-cycle election, and the people who are tuned in and turned out for a November election in an off year in 2025 are generally the people who are going to be paying attention. Generally going to be the people reaching the Richmonder that are showing that Glenn Youngkin, the incumbent Republican governor, is saying, drop out of the race. You should not be here. You're not fit for the office. You shouldn't be running. You're going to throw us into electoral despair. And Winsome Sears, who hasn't been solving any of these issues on her own either. I mean, when you take a look at the governor's race, Winsome Sears has made a name for herself in a very negative way. I do think that it is going to be very interesting to see that in this gubernatorial race, who does better? The lieutenant governor Democrat or the gubernatorial Democrat? Because I do think Democrats will win back the attorney general's race. I think they'll win back the lieutenant governor's race. I think they'll win back the gubernatorial race. I think they'll hold on to the House of Delegates or win the House of Delegates, and I think they'll win the Senate too. Democrats still have control, but when I say win, I mean maintain. Overall, I think this is something that definitely deserves a lot more coverage because what it means is the Virginia GOP is in a complete state of panic. This was meant to be an election that they were going to try to fend off the Democratic Party, hold their ground. It doesn't look like there's much ground to hold on to when your lieutenant governor nominee is on the brink of dropping out because of not even being a vetted enough candidate. When Winsome Sears is caught on a hot mic saying, I don't care, not I don't care, but I don't understand why people are upset about federal layoffs when a huge chunk of the D.C. workforce lives in Northern Virginia, Maryland, shout out Maryland, my home state, but lives in Virginia. When you see those vote totals come in from Arlington, shouldn't be too surprising to anyone who's familiar with the area or familiar just simply with reactive politics. That these two candidates, a combination, is a perfect storm for a Democratic victory in a no more than perfect year for a Democratic victory. With no more than perfect circumstances, with the Doge cuts and Donald Trump's really big change up of the federal government. Two states, again, Maryland and Virginia, are always going to feel that first. It'll be interesting. And I think Republicans have really made this election very difficult to win. And a lot of it is unforced errors. Whether it's an unforced error on the side of the Trump administration or the candidate that they are choosing to nominate and run. Those are the things the GOP will have to consider. Because when the autopsy comes out and they say, how do we lose Virginia by 10 points after winning it by 2 4 years prior and keeping Harris at 5, they'll have to look at things like this. They'll have to look at those early warning signs that Glenn Youngkin, who for all that I think there's a lot of criticism from the right and the left on him, he knows how to win in Virginia. He knows how to win in a state that Biden won by 10 points. And whether that had to do with the year, because it absolutely helped, Youngkin has largely stayed out of the fray. He did a very careful balance, delicate balance of Trump's endorsement, but not overarching Trump support. He's someone that reminds you of someone who, if they could win a primary, spoiler alert, probably could win a primary, would be a very strong national contender. But that's not where he's at. But in Virginia, he knows ball. He knows how to win, and he knows how to lose when you're looking at it from this perspective. He knows exactly that John Reed will lose. Even if Republicans somehow hold on to the governorship, there are things like this that bring down individual candidates, just like we saw with Mark Robinson. And so I don't think he expects or wants that to happen. He wants there to be a reset, as is being commented on here by the Virginia Mercury, because if he decides to drop out of the race, it provides and prompts a reset. Somebody new can enter into the race, and somebody new can win the race, supposedly, right? Because I don't think that'll happen. But I don't know if it will happen at baseline, because John Reed, I said Josh, we're talking about Josh Stein, switching up my names here. But it's up to him. And as the lieutenant governor nominee, he can make that decision. But very much looks like the Virginia GOP, from what was this rising bastion for the party in 2021, that was the first stand against Biden, might have ended. Then and there, going into 2024, Kamala Harris wins the state. Going into 2025, could be in a very dire state for the Virginia GOP between now, 2028, and potentially beyond. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch and a playlist for my 2025 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.